May these blessed moments guide you toward peace, purpose, and heavenly connection. Heed this revelation, chosen guardian. What I'm about to share will upend every notion you've held about the unseen war unfolding around you. As these words reach your ears, those who oppose you are already reeling from an outcome they never envisaged. Their painstakingly constructed strongholds have crumbled, strewn about like shards of crystal underfoot. Amid the debris of their own designs, they stand bewildered, desperate to understand how their masterstroke turned into such a devastating undoing. They snatched the wheel with brimming confidence, convinced they alone steered the course toward your downfall. As they set their scheme into motion, they fancied themselves captains of destiny. Yet now a jarring revelation crashes over them like a sudden squall ripping through placid seas. They never guided the journey 1 inch. Instead, the Prince of Lies held the helm, driving their ambitions headlong into an unbreakable fortress of ruin. This ruin cannot be undone. Their pride was swept away like weathered statues engulfed by a relentless flood. Yet our outlook remains undimmed. To fully grasp the enormity of what just transpired for anyone bold enough to challenge the sacred blueprint steering your destiny, we need to rewind all the way to the origin, to the very instant this majestic cosmic drama was first set into motion. It began with murmurs, dark whispers that crept into the ears of those who already harbored tiny seeds of anger, resentment, and jealousy. These targets weren't chosen at random. The enemy knew exactly who to target. He could smell their spiritual weakness, like a predator can identify wounded prey. Your old pals, family members who ought to have rejoiced in your development, and co-workers who observed your rise with increasing resentment. He magnified what was already there rather than completing the work himself, since he is incredibly efficient. When they spotted you taking a different route, that small spark of jealousy grew into a fierce fire. He amplified that little voice of insecurity that said they weren't good enough until it became an obsession that screamed. The offers then arrived. Oh, the offers were lovely. I've picked one. They arrived in precisely the form of temptation that each individual was unable to withstand. For some, it was money, real, tangible money in return for specific acts that were taken against you. For others, promises of status and position, the very things they had convinced themselves you had taken away from them just by being there for the right reasons. Others were promised the delicious taste of vengeance, the joy of defeating someone they believed to be superior to everyone else. The cosmic joke, however, starts to take shape at this point, because all of these offers had fine print in terms of spirituality that none of them bothered to read. They signed contracts without really knowing what they were getting into because they were so obsessed by their anger and desire to see you fail. They signed away their own spiritual authority and gave the devil the keys to their entire existence, even though they believed they were making agreements that would give them control over you. Yellow heart if you feel the divine love. Now is the time to share. Click the super thank you button on YouTube to contribute $50 or more and help us spread God's blessings. What you do is being watched and serves as a seed, and in the future it will come back to you a millionfold. The best thing is that the devil was aware from the start that you would be immune to all of their attacks. He has attempted to approach others similar to you in the past. He is aware of the telltale indication of heavenly protection. He can identify the fragrance of a person who is part of a higher authority and has been marked for a function that is outside of his purview. Nevertheless, he made these proposals because he wanted crash test dummies for a much bigger experiment, not because he believed they would be successful in ruining you. The devil has been gathering information on heavenly protection for ages, you see. Each time he sends someone after a chosen one, he gains new insight into heaven's defenses. Your adversaries were his lab rats in an experiment he fully expected to fail, not his soldiers in a conflict he anticipated winning. Whether they would be successful in hurting you was not the question. The question was how dramatically they would fail in their attempt, and of course, how horribly they would destroy themselves. They started carrying out their well-thought-out schemes against you one by one. They cast their spells. The funds were transferred. The complex arrangements were activated. Some targeted your reputation. while others attempted to destroy your relationships. Some were brazen and tried to steal what was properly yours or to obstruct your possibilities. The most naive of them even believed that they might bind someone who wears a holy garment with spiritual chains. However, they found that nothing stayed, and this is where their terrifying tale really starts. Every curse was like rains on a windshield, bouncing off you. Each time they set a trap, their own ankles jerked back. 3 more doors opened elsewhere for everyone they attempted to shut in your face. Apparently unaware of the spiritual battle going on all around you, you continued to rise, to move forward, and to shine brighter. At the same time, they were experiencing something else that they had not expected when they signed their contracts with darkness. With the accuracy of a master destroyer who knows precisely which threads to pull in order to bring down an entire tapestry, their own lives started to fall apart. It began modestly. A relationship that appeared to be strong started to show signs of weakness for no obvious reason. Money that should have arrived didn't. An opportunity that should have been assured abruptly failed. However, they were not sporadic bad lucks. This was a methodical breakdown, with the devil collecting on debts they were unaware they had accrued. Your entire spiritual authority is pledged as collateral when you enter into a contract with the enemy. Everything that comes your way, every blessing, every protection you've taken for granted, becomes a part of the payment structure. And when it comes to getting what he's due, the devil is a careful accountant. He wanted more than just their consent to attack you. He wanted their energy signature, spiritual frequency, and very nature to turn into a lighthouse for evil in this world. Every individual who accepted his offer turned into a living antenna for evil energies, sending hate and destruction into the air around them as well as toward you. Their children suffered and their families started to disintegrate in ways that didn't seem to have anything to do with their schemes against you, because they became spiritually radioactive and contaminated everything they touched with the same toxic energy that had engulfed them. Allowing darkness to rule your life, Chosen One, does more than simply lead you to your destination. It takes you on a picturesque journey through all of your relationships, dreams, and treasured possessions, methodically destroying each one as payment for services provided. $90 is a handkerchief for a mother's tear, a blanket for a homeless person, a prayer for a broken heart. Some attempted to justify this increasing devastation by convincing themselves that it was only temporary and that things will get back to normal when they had completed their mission against you. They failed to see that once they had given up their spiritual power, normal was never an option. The devil doesn't give restoration packages to former employees or take on temporary employment. The weight of their spiritual obligation started to grow as their attempts to harm you failed. The same individuals who believed they had the strength to overthrow someone who was protected by God found they were unable to shield themselves from the fallout from their own decisions. Their relationships that had supported them for years abruptly became poisonous or just vanished. The health started to deteriorate, and their finances dried up like rivers in a drought. The most pernicious aspect of their decline was the way it seemed to be coincidental. A vehicle accident here, a job loss there, an unexpected medical diagnosis. They never made the connection between their spiritual decisions and the series of calamities that befell them. Instead, their thoughts were racing to come up with rational reasons. Every time they tried to climb out, they were dragged farther into the grinding gears of their own demise because they were unable to see that they had willingly entered a cosmic wood chipper. In the meantime, you had spiritual discernment, something they had long since given up. You could feel the change in the environment surrounding some people even before their attacks were actual. Like an immune system identifying a pathogen, something in your soul would flinch when they stepped into your space. You discovered that you were instinctively avoiding people who would later turn out to be plotters against you. This was heavenly wisdom protecting you by making your enemies spiritually repulsive to be near. It wasn't paranoia. They took note of this retreat and saw it as a sign of conceit, as if you believed you were too fine for them. They never realized that the filth they carried was being physically rejected by your spirit. Light and darkness really can't mix, like oil and water, and you didn't choose to become more and more detached from them. Incompatible frequencies were pushed apart by a spiritual law before harm could be done. They were so enraged by this supernatural early warning system. They couldn't comprehend how you withdrew from relationships before they had an opportunity to deceive you, and how you seemed to know things about them that they hadn't yet disclosed. The response was straightforward but frustrating to their weakened brains. You were protected by a system so advanced that it had foresight into their schemes. Dove, brother and sister, everything done in faith is returned in God's abundance. You can donate $100 using the Super Thank You button and be part of this divine call. If your roots are connected to Him, your fruit will be blessed. The worst thing, though, might have been the psychological agony, because they could see you every day. They had to see your ongoing prosperity, your unwavering tranquility, and your steady advancement toward your goals. As their own world fell apart, they had to see you smile. While they were barely alive, they had to witness your success. They realized slowly, cruelly, that they had been played. The success of their attacks was never the devil's intention. He had exploited their animosity as gasoline for a demolition project that was entirely about them and not about you. All along, they were the real targets. They were oblivious to the reality that they were ruining themselves because they were so focused on destroying you. They were struck with waves of this understanding. Confusion initially arose. Why weren't their meticulously prepared attacks succeeding? What caused everything they threw at you to come back at them twice as forcefully? They stepped up their efforts, believing that they could overcome any defenses you had if they just put in more effort, used more resources, and engaged more people. However, adding more people just made their issues worse. They added another liability to their spiritual portfolio with each new member they included in their plot against you. The reputations of friends who consented to spread false information about you were destroyed. Members of the family who took part in character assassination efforts saw their own families fall apart. Colleagues who attempted to undermine your career prospects saw their own careers stalling or failing completely. For each soul they brought into his program, the devil was accruing compound interest. They believed they were assembling an army to fight you, but in reality, they were erecting a pyramid of devastation, with themselves at its base, and carrying the burden of everyone's combined spiritual debt. Some of them started to see the pattern. Unexplainable tragedy began to befall one after another who joined their cause against you. However, they saw this as proof that you were somehow retaliating, that you had your own evil abilities, rather than as a warning to stop their actions. They were unable to comprehend that their demise was wholly self-inflicted and the inevitable result of their decisions breaking spiritual principles. They were even more heated as a result of this miscommunication. Some reasoned that they had to fight fire with fire if they were allegedly defending themselves by supernatural methods. In order to tip the scales in their favor, they resorted to methods that they would have previously viewed as beneath them, such as binding spells, ritual magic, and attempts to call upon barely comprehended beings. Every escalation only served to deepen their spiritual debt and hasten their demise. Others adopted a different strategy, believing that with sheer willpower and guile, they could outmaneuver heavenly protection. They created complex plans and multi-layered techniques that simultaneously attacked you from several directions. They looked at your relationships, patterns, and weaknesses because they believed that human knowledge could outsmart supernatural defense. They didn't understand that trying to outsmart heavenly wisdom was like trying to use a garden hose to put out the sun. Then desperation set in. They started to panic as your life grew while theirs kept getting worse. Unaware that spiritual contracts do not have cooling-off periods, several attempted to revoke their deals with darkness. Others believed that escalation was the solution to their issue, so they tried even more drastic actions. The realization finally hit them hard. They had been volunteers for a destruction they believed was intended for someone else, crash test dummies in a cosmic experiment. With the efficiency of a great craftsman, the devil had simply fulfilled their wish to be annihilated. There was no denying the brutality of the wake-up. The reality that glared back at them from every shattered fragment of their life was now unavoidable as they sat amid the wreckage of everything they had once loved. Like mist in the morning, the promises that had been whispered to them had vanished. There was no sign of the awards they had been promised for their service. Rather, they found that they had always been paying for the pleasure of being destroyed. But realizing the genuine nature of their obsession with you was possibly the most terrible realization. They started to recall who you had been to them before hatred clouded their judgment in their darkest hours. You weren't even their rival. You weren't their opponent. You were just a person who had made the decision to transcend the boundaries they had set for themselves, and your development had set off a nasty and primordial reaction inside of them. Your own existence had turned into a mirror that reflected back to them their own spiritual stagnation. They were reminded of actions they were too scared to take by each step you took in pursuit of your goal. Every barrier you established to preserve your peace brought to light those that they were unable to uphold. Each benefit that entered your life revealed blessings that they had turned away from or undermined in their own. Although your light didn't cause their gloom, it did increase their awareness of it, and they were angry with you for that. This explains the violent outbursts that occurred when people left abusive relationships. You weren't merely making a personal choice when you decided to cut ties with people and circumstances that no longer served your highest good. You were exhibiting a level of spiritual maturity and self-respect they couldn't comprehend. Their incapacity to release what wasn't meant for them was revealed by your ability to do so, and this revelation seemed like an assault on their whole identity. Sending $45 is filled with love, like Jesus' last words on the cross. Forgive, for they know not what they do. They had seen your achievement as stealing something that was rightly theirs, your progress as abandonment, and your boundaries as rejection. By refusing to stay stunted at their level of spiritual development, you had, in their warped view, taken something from them. They never realized that, if they so desired, your elevation made room for their own development. Instead, believing your wings to be a personal slight to their decision to stay grounded, they decided to go after your destruction. Some of them tried to reach out to you in their darkest moments of insight, not with sincere remorse, but with deceptive appeals meant to take advantage of any compassion you might still have. They made up sob stories about how their lives had fallen apart, conveniently leaving out how their attacks on you contributed to that devastation. Instead of claiming responsibility for their own demise, they portrayed themselves as victims of their circumstances. But this procedure has sharpened your spiritual perception even further. You could tell the difference between intentional manipulation and sincere regret. No amount of weeping could remove the spiritual odor that still clings to them as a result of their sinister decisions. Above all, you realize that allowing them back into your life would be like letting a Trojan horse into your home. They weren't any less dangerous because of their desperation. The handful who did come to you with what appeared to be genuine regret soon showed their true colors. They had conditions attached to their apologies. Their remorse depended on your willingness to save them from the repercussions of their conduct. They desired forgiveness that erased the consequences of their decisions without forcing them to face the truth about who they were as a result of those decisions. However, change is not a retrograde process. A person has crossed a line that cannot be erased with words alone once they have shown that they are willing to join with darkness against divine purpose. Their behavior had shown what was on their mind, and people's hearts don't alter just because things get uncomfortable. They were susceptible to the devil's recruitment because of the same spiritual vulnerability that would make them susceptible once more when betrayal opportunities arose. The real suffering began at that point, when you realized that their entire campaign against you had been driven by their inability to accept that you had outgrown the version of yourself that required their approval, their consent, and their presence in your life, rather than any actual grievance. Your progress reminded them of their own stagnation. Thus they had waged war on your destiny. They now observe the devastation of everything they once held dear as they sit in the rubble of their own creation. And they are aware of the horrible irony. They gave up their own futures in an attempt to ruin yours, and all they ultimately achieved was their own demise. While others are still buried behind the debris of their decisions, you keep rising, because they didn't want to be caught in the crossfire of someone else's stupid decision to challenge you. Some of your former adversaries' colleagues started to distance themselves in advance. Regardless of how legitimate someone's complaints against you may be, they had witnessed enough destruction to realize that fighting you was a losing venture, because possible risks were eliminated before they could even become real issues. This added layer of security was put around your life. The devil believed he was testing your defenses with them. However, in actuality, God was demonstrating your protection via their attacks. Their failure was more than simply their failure. It was a manifestation of heavenly force at work in your life. Each crashing dummy turned into a monument to the reality that human schemes just cannot affect certain people. Glowing star, if you want to witness God's miracles, act now. Contribute $100 or more through Super Thank You on YouTube. Your offering is like a seed that comes back to you when planted. Let His light illuminate your steps. Every donation is an echo in His plan. And now, something lovely is taking place after they destroyed themselves. The trend is starting to become apparent to the very people who previously supported your adversaries, once muttered behind your back, and once questioned your motivation. They are observing that while you continue to thrive, everyone who opposes you ends up in disaster. They are beginning to see that opposing you is not only unwise, but also harmful to your spiritual health. People who could have been persuaded to join future attacks against you are now reconsidering, creating a protective buffer around your existence. They've witnessed what happens to people who think you're just another person they can control or ruin. They have seen the crash dummy effect firsthand, and the majority of them are wise enough to avoid suffering the same fate. However, the devil's experiment has also shown you something else, something that should give you a great deal of confidence as you go forward. When you are living out your purpose, you find that you are indeed untouchable, because nothing can hurt you in the long run, not because nothing will ever be hurled at you. You discovered that your link to a power that automatically guards you is what gives you protection, not your capacity to defend yourself. This information completely alters your future course. You have witnessed how your opponent's schemes turn out, so you no longer need to be afraid of them. Your protection speaks for itself, so you don't have to expend energy attempting to persuade others of your value. Since shadows cannot control light, you may stop worrying about who is conspiring against you in the shadows. Even if it wasn't what they believed they were doing, the crash dummies fulfilled their function. They gave you an example of heavenly protection that you will remember for the remainder of your trip. They demonstrated to you how your calling has integrated security that kicks in on its own when it senses danger. They demonstrated that certain people are just picked for protection in ways that are incomprehensible to humans. And now you start a fresh chapter while they sit in their wreckage. You proceed with the assurance of someone who has witnessed their own defense put to the test and found to be completely successful, knowing that the very people who attempted to destroy you have instead turned into monuments to your heavenly shielding. You carry on with your quest,